Hi everyone. This video is about 11.6 and 11.7, which cover the volume and surface area of a sphere. So we're going to apply volume formulas to problems involving spheres or hemispheres. So a hemisphere being like half of a sphere. And then we're also going to apply the surface area formula to solve problems about spheres. So this whole chapter has been about volume, so it is kind of interesting that we're introducing a surface area formula in this chapter all about volume. That was a choice the book made to save that for now, but it also helps to illustrate that there's a difference between these things, and so I'll try to talk more about that difference in later slides. So here is the formula for volume of a sphere. Volume is equal to 4/3 times pi times the radius cubed. Now remember, volume is like the amount of three-dimensional space contained within a sphere. So this would be more relevant. This would be more related to, like, how much water would it take to fill up a sphere, or how many marbles would it take to fill up kind of the inside of a sphere. Those are things that relate to volume. And here's the surface area formula. Surface area of a sphere is equal to 4 times pi times the radius squared. So notice the last formula had a radius cubed for volume, and for area it's a radius squared that shows up. So this would be more like a question that would relate to surface area would be more like, something where you would be like painting the outside of a sphere. So it's basically, you're thinking about taking the surface of a sphere, laying it out flat, and how much two-dimensional, like flat space would that take up? So we have our formulas. Let's see them in action as we find the volume and the surface area for the sphere that's shown. So in the end, when we get our answers, we'll round each to 2 decimal places. Now they show us this sphere here, and this distance here is not a radius. It's twice the radius, because a radius just goes from the center to the outside. So if we want to get our radius, which is something we will need, both the volume formula and the surface area formula involve the radius. If we want that radius, we need to divide 1.8 by 2 to get the distance from the center to the outside of the sphere. So 0.9 units is the radius. Now, to get the volume, we just plug in that radius. So here is the volume formula for a sphere. Here's where I plug in 0.9 to that radius. And so when I do on my calculator, the order, so the only thing that matters in the order, or where people might get tripped up, is that you have to do the exponent first. You have to do 0.9 to the third before you multiply by these things out front, because order of operations says that exponents come before multiplication. So you do 0.9 to the third, then you multiply by pi, you multiply by 4/3, and you get about 3.05 units cubed. So if it's volume, it's cubic units. Okay, surface area. Again, we're just plugging in 0.9 for the radius. Do the exponent first, do 0.9 squared first, then multiply by pi and by 4. And that should come out to 10.18 units squared. So square units because it's a measure of area, surface area, more precisely. Okay, now you are also going to encounter problems where you're talking about a hemisphere and not a whole sphere, and so the next slides tell you how to adjust for that. So here's a hemisphere, and the radius, they give us the radius this time. We don't have to divide by 2 to find the radius. The radius is 3/4. I do show what that is in terms of a decimal, just in case people prefer that. So 3/4 is the same as 0.75. So the radius is 3/4 units or 0.75 units, whichever way you prefer to think about it. Now, let's think about how to adjust the volume formula now that it's a hemisphere, half of a sphere. So the volume of a hemisphere is half the volume of a sphere with the same radius. So if there was a whole sphere with the same radius, that would have twice the volume that this hemisphere has. So here's the formula for the volume of a sphere. I'm going to cut that in half at the end, or I'm going to cut that in half to get the volume of the hemisphere. So you could just, find your volume of a sphere with a radius of 0.75 and then divide by 2. Dividing by 2 is the same thing is accomplishing the same thing as this multiplying by 1/2. So we plug in the radius of 0.75, do 0.75 to the third first, then multiply by pi and 4/3 and 1/2, and you should get 0.88 units cubed. Now, here's what's a little bit trickier. It's our last example, but pay attention to how we adjust the surface area formula for a hemisphere. So this is still our radius. Now, what I want you to notice is when you cut a sphere in half, and you think about the surfaces, or there's this top part. It's like half the surface area of the entire sphere. But now there's also this circle on the bottom, which is part of the surface. So you have to add on that the area of that circle on the bottom to calculate surface area. So that's why I say the surface area of a hemisphere is half the surface area of a sphere with the same radius plus the area of the circle on the bottom. Don't forget the area of the circle on the bottom. So here's the surface area of a sphere, 4 times pi times r squared. We're cutting that in half because we only have half of that. But then we add on the area of the circle on the bottom, pi r squared. So for both of these, for the radius here, we're plugging in 0.75 in both of those spots. Make sure you do the exponents before you do the multiplication. So do 0.75 squared first, then multiply by these things. Same here, do 0.75 squared first, then multiply by pi, and at the very end add these terms together. And you should get 5.30 units squared. Just so you know my overall plan, this will be the last section that we do from chapter 10. There is another section, but this will be the last, from chapter 11, excuse me. And then I want to do the very first section of chapter, or the very first two sections of chapter 12, because they are, I just think they're really important. Right triangle trigonometry is something that shows up on standardized tests, the ACT, the SAT, and so I just want you to at least get some experience with that before the end of the year. One thing that I will promise is I am not going to do any more tests. Not for chapter 11, not for the little part of chapter 12 that we do. So you should really focus on just getting the remaining homework done, and even completing, past homework that you didn't do. I can still take that for credit. I really want you to focus on just doing the remaining homework and catching up on any homework you missed. Okay. Email me if you have questions. Good luck, and have a good one, everybody.